Today we are here to kind of just celebrate one of our fellows who has done their travels through Scotland. So the Dallas Architecture Foundation, in conjunction with the ADEX, provides scholarships and fellowships to not only high schoolers, but also college graduates and young professionals. And the notion of that is to travel to different parts of the world, understand the culture, understand how that influences architecture and even social environments, and then bring that back and share that with our community here in Dallas. The goal of the foundation is to connect with our communities and provide design access for all. And so what we're doing today is try to bring a little bit of that culture and architecture to our broader community in the hopes of engaging in what normally we don't experience here and learning from it. So today we have McCunney, who has traveled to Scotland, and through her travels has learned a lot about particularly castles of Scotland. So we look forward to hearing from you, Caitlin, and the opportunities that you had to get to know the environment, see the castles, and certainly understand the culture of Scotland. So with that, I'll pass it on to you and let's get going.
Okay, sounds good. Let me pull up my presentation here. Okay, can you see it okay?
Yeah, we can see it okay. And as anyone there that is joining us, feel free to do Q&As. So we'll hold those to the very end. Certainly, if there's any particular ones, we may take a little break in between. However, at the end, we'll have a Q&A. So go ahead, Caitlin.
Awesome. Well, like Clemente said, my name is McCunney. I was a recipient of the 2022 Kolb, Berglund, McDermott Traveling Fellowships. And I studied the castles of Scotland, as you could probably guess from the title. Let's see. There we go. Like you guys probably already know, ADEX offers these fellowships yearly to architecture professionals, and it's meant to study different areas of architecture across the globe. And my proposal took me across the Atlantic to the country of Scotland in search of castles. So if you don't know already, Scotland is this little red country over here in Europe and the United Kingdom. You can see the boundaries here. It's right next to England. So there's a definite dynamic there. And I want to get through my itinerary of my trip before we get started with the analysis. But first of all, I flew into Glasgow, and then I road trip to Stirling, Fort William, the Isle of Skye, Inverness, and then to the east to Aberdeen, and stayed in the Highlands, and then road trip to Edinburgh, where I flew out of. So about a week in Scotland. And the castles that I ended up studying are the following: Stirling Castle, then Eilean Donan Castle to the east, Urquhart Castle to the north by Inverness, then Dunatar on the east side of Scotland, Blackhead Castle in the Highlands, and then finally Edinburgh Castle. So I want to get through there's a really cute sheep here that I got a picture of, wanted to make sure that made it to the presentation, but wanted to get through the different analysis methods that I used and what I studied exactly. So for each castle, I went through the year built, when it was built, where it was built, the size. The site made a big impact on a lot of these castles. The purpose, if it had a clan associated to it, and significant historical events, different functions of the castle, defensive mechanisms, its evolution to its current state, as well as the experiential aspect.
Hey, Caitlin.
Yeah.
Just a quick question for you in the beginning. So if you don't mind sharing, what got you interested in this notion of going out to Scotland and looking into castles? What was your interest there, and what kind of led you to kind of propose this as your focus of study?
That's a great question. So I have Scottish heritage. I found out, I thought it was Irish for a while. I found out I was Scottish and had some Scottish heritage. So I've always been interested in Scotland. And I also, if I'm honest, I was watching Outlander, if anyone watches that show, and just seeing the landscapes, I was just super excited to try to go there. And the idea of castles came to mind. So like the 2 and 2 kind of fit together. And that's why I ended up with this idea. But that's a good question.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, so before we get into the castle specifically, I wanted to talk about some Scotland 101, some history and slang. The Scots are pretty hard to understand if you've ever heard a Scottish person. And they have a bit of slang that I wasn't used to, but thought I might define it here for y'all. Bonnie is a word for pretty. Bonnie Prince Charlie, you'll hear in the presentation. Eileen, like Eileen Donnan Castle, means island in Gaelic. Jacobite, this is a supporter of restoring the Scottish Stuarts to the British throne. This theme will come into play for a lot of these castles. Loch is obviously lake in Gaelic, and Nessie I threw in here is the nickname of the Loch Ness Monster, which is a 745 deep lake that will come into play as well. Some more words here. Clan, it's not necessarily a family, but it can be a broader term, different extended family that live on the same lands and led by a chief. And you'll hear about the Highlands and the Lowlands. Geographically, these are separated by the Highland boundary fault, but culturally, they're very different as well. In the Highlands, they speak Gaelic and they use the clan system as a societal organization tool. And they're kind of seen as backwards to the English, and they're persecuted a lot through history. The Lowlands is to the east of the fault, and they identified more with the English and English customs. Picts you'll hear about, they are the ancient people that lived in Scotland. We saw them as early as 300 AD. They're known for their stone crosses and carved stones around Scotland. They speak Celtic, and they lived in underground houses. Dun is a Pictish word. This means place of strength. So you'll see this in Donatar Castle. And this is a little graphic of where the Highlands are exactly and separated by that fault. As you can see, Glasgow and Edinburgh are kind of in the Lowlands, and then everything else is in the Highlands. So a brief history, as brief as I could make it. History plays a huge role into these castles. I'll try to be as brief as I can, but in the 1st century, we saw the Romans come to England. They conquered England, but they couldn't conquer Scotland because of those fierce Picts that were there. And you'll see that kind of part of Scottish culture. They're very stubborn and fierce, and it's part of their people and their heritage. In the 5th century is when the Scots came over from Ireland, and they converted the native Picts to Christianity with St. Columba. You'll see this in some of the castle history. And they lived fine together, they worked together, and they used the clan system. In 1066, we had the Anglo-Saxons from England come in, they're in the Lowlands. And then close to 1300, we have the Wars of Independence. Pretty complicated set of wars, and you'll see a pattern that the English and Scots fought a lot. But in the Wars of Independence, the English and Scots were fighting over royal control of Scotland. And this involved Edward I of England, William Wallace, which is the inspiration for Braveheart, if you've seen that movie, and Robert the Bruce. And this ended in 1328 with Scottish independence that was short-lived. But in the mid-16th century, we have the emergence of Mary Queen of Scots, which you may have heard of. She's Mary Stuart. So if we remember the Jacobites, she's the beginning of the Stuart line. She took the throne in 1561, but she was executed by Queen Elizabeth. Her son, though, took back the throne and ruled both England and Scotland for a time. Did pretty well together. But by the 17th century, we have the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, which is essentially a civil war between Scotland, Ireland, and England. And this was essentially King Charles I of England. He wanted to push Episcopal religion on everyone. And it caused a rift between the royalists and the parliamentarians. Scotland was with the parliamentarians at first, but then this leader of the parliamentarians, Oliver Cromwell, he took it upon himself to execute King Charles, and the Scots didn't like that. So they took in his son, Charles II, and basically protected him. And this caused Oliver Cromwell to invade Scotland many times, which we'll see in the castle history. And then in the 18th century, we have the Jacobite period. This is when the exiled Scottish Stuarts in France, they were taken care of in France. They were allies with France for quite a while. The Highlanders in Scotland wanted them to retake the throne. So James Stuart and his son, Bonnie Prince Charlie, they both tried to get control of Scotland unsuccessfully, leading to the infamous Battle of Culloden in 1746, which you might be aware of if you've watched Outlander. And in turn, Jacobites were forced to renounce everything they had. And we'll see this in the castle history, where castles get taken by the English for good. And then in 1979 to present, I have a little update there that the Scots are taken by England, but they do continue to seek independence from votes in 1979, 1997, 2014. Even today, they're still trying to get independence, which I thought was pretty interesting. Okay.
Hey, Kaylin.
Yeah, sorry.
That was fantastic. I think it's so amazing to kind of look at the history, and obviously that very directly correlates to the castles, right? And very often, even within my own mind, I was thinking about castles as fortresses, and much like you mentioned about watching the episodes of, Highland, and I'm thinking of, Game of Thrones and what have you.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
That so much of what you see there certainly is derived from, just battles and conflicts of society. So I very much look forward to see how then this brief history you gave us, which sounded pretty awesome, translates to what you saw. So just wanted to say that.
Thanks. Yeah, it's definitely like a Game of Thrones for sure. When I started researching the castles more, I was getting super confused. So I wanted to try to lay out an outline so it doesn't get as confusing. But essentially, there's a lot of changing of hands of castles. Before I get into the castle specifically as well, I wanted to define some terms. A bailey is a courtyard enclosed by a curtain wall. The curtain wall isn't what you think it is. Traditionally, it's the exterior perimeter wall of a castle ground. The Great Hall, you might know from Harry Potter. It is a great hall. It's a meeting space, a main meeting space and dining space that is typical to castles. The keep, you might remember from Game of Thrones. It's actually a castle term. It means the strongest building in the castle grounds. A portcullis is that traditional iron lattice gate that you see that comes down and protects a castle gate. A battery is an area where there's artillery, cannons such as that. Battlement is that traditional castle wall where you see the rectangular cutouts. It's meant for defensive purposes because you can kind of hide behind the wall and shoot an arrow out the opening there. An esplanade, that's kind of a big open space that's reserved for walking for pleasure, just to hang out. A gatehouse is kind of a collection of towers and bridges and barriers at the front of the castle. Kind of the main outer defenses is a collection of things. And then a fun last one, murder holes. They're basically these little windows above the gate that they shoot the hot oil down and rocks and arrows and other things to just try to defend that inner gate before it gets breached. Okay, on to the castles. So the first castle I have on the list is Stirling Castle, located in Stirling, Scotland. This is in between Glasgow and Edinburgh. It's located at the intersection of Highlands and Lowlands, so it's kind of a great place to seek control. It was nicknamed the Brooch, kind of connecting the two lands together. And just a visual of Stirling City. The castle's centrally located. It's right by the River Forth, and you can see the Stirling Old Bridge. That's a famous site for a few battles. And it had visual control over the city being in that central space. It's perched upon this volcanic outcropping that's about 250 feet above the city. So that height advantage obviously allows for a great visual control of the area. And it's enclosed by these curtain walls that we see in the satellite view. It's about 350,000 square feet of land. So it's a pretty big castle. A little sketch here of the castle grounds and the different buildings to give y'all orientation of where you're at. But the earliest structures of Stirling Castle were built in the 11th century. It had the inner and outer defenses at the beginning here, and you move into the inner courtyard, the inner bailey there, and you can see the battery, the palace, the chapel, and the great hall. And then you just have outstanding views to the north at the nether bailey, where they have a lot of the battery and artillery components. Stirling Castle had a tumultuous history. Like we mentioned, it's like Game of Thrones. It changed hands a lot of times between the Scots and the English. From the beginning, it was more of a royal residence, but increasingly became more of a political strategic pawn in these different wars. During the Wars of Independence, William Wallace, he beat out a larger English force down by the Stirling Bridge there, and you can see the monument in this picture far away. Later, the castle fell back to English hands, and Robert the Bruce got it back. But Robert the Bruce had a pattern of a kind of twisted defensive strategy. Once he got a castle, he wanted to demolish it to keep it out of English hands. So if he can't have it, no one can. The Scots don't want the English taking control. So kind of a twisted fate that it had. However, King Edward III of England, he still was able to take back Stirling, and he rebuilt in the 1330s. So his strategy didn't really work, Robert the Bruce, but Scotland took back the castle in the mid-1300s, and for about the next 200 years, it housed several royals, including Mary, Queen of Scots, and James I through James VI, her son. During this time, there are many renovations and additions, including a watchtower, entry gate, royal chapel, great hall, palace, and royal apartments. Mary, Queen of Scots, she was actually coronated here in this chapel to the right in 1543, which was a fun fact, I thought. Here we see the great hall and palace. Stirling did go through a few more sieges after the royals lived here, with the War of the Three Kingdoms. When we learned about Oliver Cromwell, he came and sieged Stirling a few times, and it exchanged back to the English because of that. In 1745, we have the Jacobite uprising, so they played a role here as well. Bonnie Prince Charlie made an appearance. He tried to win back this castle, but we know that was unsuccessful. After that, the castle moved to more of a military focus. The Great Hall was renovated to military barracks and powder magazines, and that's in this Nether Bailey area. And ultimately, the Scottish government took back the castle and renovated to what you see today. And curtain wall here with what we call a wall walk, where you can survey the area. And it just has great views of Stirling below. It's incredible. And here are some pictures of the interior. They had some actors in there dressed up and acting the part. I think I have a shot of one yelling about demons or something. But you'll see there's a lot of unicorns in the interior. The unicorn was the symbol of Stirling. And you'll see some of these castles have animal symbols as their kind of mascot. And some historical furniture here. And then to really feel that experiential aspect, I made a few videos of each castle. So I hope this helps you feel the flow of the castle a bit more and the feel of the exterior and interior spaces. Let's see if I can get this started. Beautiful space, just amazing views. Whoops, didn't mean to play that again. So we'll move on to our next castle here. If you're ready for it, Eileen Donnan Castle is near Isle of Skye in Scotland. Probably my favorite castle on the tour. I might be biased. As you can see, it's up here and to the north near Isle of Skye. Situated next to the Atlantic and on a water highway of sorts, Loch Duke is situated perfectly for defending against Viking raids, which was a real thing back in the 13th century for the Scots. In this map view, you can kind of see better. It is an island. That Eileen word is coming back. It was originally occupied by a Saint Donnan, to convert the Picts there in the 7th century, which is where it gets its name. But it was later built up with a castle in the early 13th century to defend the Scottish Sea Kingdom of this area and the land of the Kintails to the east. And in the satellite view, you can really get a sense that it's on an island. It's not on the mainland anymore. It's connected, though, by this curvilinear bridge. It's about 235 feet long, and I just love that it curves up to the building and gives you a really unique perspective to see it at different angles. And in this little sketch here, we can see it has curtain walls, pretty typical of a castle, your gatehouse. It evolved over time. It originally just had the curtain walls and gatehouse, but in the 16th century, it added a tower, a sea gate, and by the 1900s, when the McRaes bought it, they added more modern castle residences. To dive into the history a little bit, Eileen Donnan, as I mentioned, was a defensive point for Viking raids that were very prevalent in this area in northern and western Scotland. And it evolved a few times with several additions when it was owned by the McKinsey clan in the 16th and 17th century. And then the Jacobites control of it. We hear about the Jacobites again. They took control of the castle in 1715. And as we know, they did not win the war. So the English just totally dominated them and caused really significant destruction to the castle. And for the next 200 years, it just laid abandoned and vacant and suffered a lot of decay. But thankfully, a local family that lived in the area for centuries and even worked in the castle at times, they bought the castle in 1911, the McRaes, and put a lot of effort into restoring the space. They still own the castle today, which is pretty unique. They still reside in it at times. So unfortunately, we can't, no one can take photos or videos inside the castle. So I just have exterior ones here. But you could really get a sense that someone lived here and what it would be like to live in a castle. Probably my favorite castle due to this restoration, and you can really feel like you could live there. And obviously the siding of it, it's so impressive when you approach it. It feels like an accident almost when you find it. And I really love that the mood of the place seems to change with the weather. In the first photo, you saw that it was very dark and mysterious. And then by the end of our tour, it looked like this. The Scottish weather changes pretty drastically, but it's bright and beautiful, and you can see that it's an ever-changing landscape. So I have another video clip for y'all. Let's see if I can get this started. So you can see it's a very moody space and absolutely beautiful sight. Oops. Next up, or sorry, Clemente, did you have a question?
No, I'm just astounded by, you know, I just kind of have so many questions in my mind that I'm sure we're all excited to kind of ask you, yes, in relation to your experience, the permanence of these castles. And so I'll just let you get through that because I want to engage in a great conversation about other aspects, but this is fantastic.
I'm glad you're excited.
Oh, yeah.
Next up, we have Urquhart, I think is how at least the British say it, Urquhart Castle. And this is located located next to infamous Loch Ness. So you can see it just has these incredible views for miles. And to orient you again, we're up here by Inverness, right on Loch Ness. So Urquhart was originally a residence for a Pictish nobleman. We hear about the Picts again. That was dating back to 580 AD. So this castle has been in business for a while. It takes up about 70,000 square feet and has this incredible visual control of Loch Ness and has some easy ship entries with a water gate. And it's just incredible how deep Loch Ness is. The satellite image is so blue, you can tell how deep it is. It's amazing. But to get to my little castle sketch here, we have the different components of the castle. This one's unique in that it has a drawbridge. I thought that was pretty fun, like a fairy tale, and has different components like the gatehouse, the Great Hall, tower. What's called a motte is earth that's been moved to make a fortification, and that's back from the Picts era. A dewcot, which is a Scottish word for kind of a pigeon coop, and even a blacksmith area. And it's just a great example of medieval architecture. This is a view. This is actually the same day I went to Eilean Donan. So the weather, again, is crazy. It's beautiful when you see these pictures. Not one raindrop anywhere. But records show that St. Columba, if you remember from our history lesson, he visited this castle in 580 AD to baptize the Urquhart family. And on his visit, he actually documented in his journal that he encountered a monster in the loch. So that's where little Nessie comes in. This is a view of the motte that I was speaking about earlier, but the castle exchanged ownership repeatedly, like most of these castles, between the Scots and the English, especially during the Wars of Independence. And later, James IV gave the castle to the Grant clan that was local. He wanted them to repair and restore the site. But the Mackenzies, I don't think, were friends of the Grant clan. The McDonalds, they weren't really friendly with the Grants, and they wanted this castle. So they constantly raided the castle. They looted over 3,000 cattle and sheep. I thought that was a fun fact. But essentially the Grants were like, I'm not staying here. This is crazy. So they got out, and the English got control of the castle once again in 1689. The Jacobites came in and they got control of Urquhart, and they brought the castle back to Scottish hands, but in a fashion of their ancestors, they decided to blow up the castle because if they had it, they didn't want the English to have it. So the castle suffered a lot of destruction. As you can see from these pictures, it's not super restored, which is unfortunate, but it laid abandoned for years after that until the Historic Environment of Scotland took control of the property in 1913. And like I said, it's mostly destroyed, but it does really beautifully frame the landscape around it. And it was a great visit, beautiful landscape. But before I leave this Loch Ness area, I wanted to mention I did go to a museum called the Loch Ness Monster Museum next door, and it was so kitschy and absurd, and I highly recommend anyone to visit it. There's all these 80s displays and projections and light shows, and I just think everyone should go. But spoiler alert, there's no evidence that she really exists. But before we leave Loch Ness and Urquhart altogether, I have another video clip for you. And this one actually has bagpipes, so be prepared with your volume. So that is Urquhart and Loch Ness. Next up, we're going to the east of Scotland, to Donatar Castle near Stonehaven. Maybe this is my favorite. I can't really decide, but it just has a crazy location. You can see the cliffs here. But again, we're on the east side of Scotland, situated on the coast of the North Sea. So excellent position to control that area and the sea here. There's evidence of Picts nearby from 5000 BC. So arguably this is the oldest site. And it had evidence of Saint Minan, another saint that came to convert the Picts around 400 AD. And in this satellite view, you can really see how elevated it is from the rest of the landscape here. It's named Donatar. Dun, like we learned before, means place of strength. So it really holds its namesake here. Its disjointed elevation from the rest of the mainland isn't a natural occurrence, actually. It was hacked away by early inhabitants because they wanted to really separate the castle lands from the rest of the mainland and have that control of defense and visual control, and just have this it's about 3,000 feet long path down to the coastline, just very visual, very exposed. So there's not really an easy way to get to the castle without being noticed and potentially murdered. This area takes up about 165,000 square feet. And the Scots believe this was the most secure location in all of Scotland. So it has that main entry at sea level, but the other of the castle grounds are 160 feet above on these sheer cliffs that you've seen in the picture. It's complete with tunnels, prison vaults, chapel, a palace, even guest lodging. So like I mentioned, it was originally inhabited by the Picts and saints for religious purposes eventually, but later it became mostly a battleground. King Donald II of Scotland was killed here by Vikings. Again, the Vikings come to play, and they destroyed a lot of the buildings in late 9th century. William Wallace had some action here. He defeated the English garrisons in 1297, and he took back control of the castle for Scotland, but English took it back as usual in 1336. And eventually Sir William Keith, a great marshal of Scotland, took back the castle and took ownership in 1392. And he kept the castle and his family until about 1715. We'll hear William Keith repeated. This is a different guy, but different generations. And he built the original keep on the castle grounds. His 5th generation son, William Keith as well, he actually brought a pet lion to Donatar for fun. And he kept the lion in this little cave that you see to the left by the gatehouse. So another reason to be scared to get to Donatar. Mary, Queen of Scots, had an appearance here. She stayed here a couple of times. There's more destruction in the War of Three Kingdoms and Oliver Cromwell, who came here. He was trying to find Charles II that we've talked about before, and Charles II actually stayed here for a bit as well. And this idea of Donatar being the safest, most secure place in Scotland prompted the Honours of Scotland, which are the crown jewels, to be hidden here. So that was an interesting fun fact that they kept it safe here for a while. In 1685, Whigs and other dissenters were imprisoned here. You'll see in the video clip, there is a small barrel vault called the Whigs Vault, and they kept 167 people packed in there. And it's just a horrible cellar with a little tiny window out to the sea. But just looked absolutely awful when you walked in it. But that was punishment for resisting Charles II. in his religious forms that he had later. The 10th generation Keith, he was ultimately forced to renounce his ownership of Dunatar due to his support of the Jacobites who failed. As we learned, the English made all these Jacobites renounce their title and lands. So this forced the castle into English hands, and the English, they didn't care about Scottish history, obviously, so they sold the castle to a mining company in 1717. This company, unfortunately, just stripped the whole property down to a shell, took everything, even the flooring and the ceiling, to sell. But fortunately, someone called Lord and Lady Cowdray, they bought the property in 1919 and started restorations, and they still own it today. And as promised, I have another video for you, and you can really see the procession up to this castle and how intense and magical it is. Beautiful sight. I love that one.
Yeah, that that is so beautiful. I mean, just the height of the place and its location. I think that when we think about castles, that's
what you think of.
castle. That's what you think about, you know.
Yeah.
And so, such a surreal and ethereal experience, I imagine, for you. Caitlin, I think that what I like to do is maybe go through some of these, the rest of these. Just gonna briefly glance at them. I want to give our audience a little bit of time to, for Q&A and get some of your thoughts as well.
Okay.
So let's look at this one and then jump to a conversation with you.
Okay. So next up we have Black Craig. This was an outlier on the tour. It's not technically a medieval castle. It's actually a historic building imitating a medieval Scottish castle, and that's called a Scottish baronial style. It can be seen on the Stirling Castle campus as well as Edinburgh, and it's located in the Highlands, so it's one of the most rural castles on the tour. As you can see, nothing around it. It's situated on a small river here, sandwiched by sheep pastures. And the other reason why it's an outlier is you can stay in it. So everyone should go and try to stay in this castle. But I stayed in the bridge house here that bridged over the river Ardle. Situated down a scenic tree-lined dirt road, this bridge house was built in 1870 by Scottish architect Patrick Fraser, and it takes up about 9,000 square feet of land, so it's definitely a smaller castle on the tour. This is that main entry that cars can go through over the bridge. You kind of feel royal staying in it, but also sort of like you're in a ship. This is the view from that bridge that you can see out onto River Ardle. And this is from inside the house. It's similar to a medieval castle in that it has the conical roofs that you see, a turret, the battlement style walls, even a spiral staircase. It's separated into 2 vacation apartments now with 4 bedrooms if you want to rent it out. This is the rooftop patio entry and some battlement walls at the rooftop. And a video here to really get a sense of the place. You'll see some sheep appear in the video. So just a quick little tour of that one. Do you want me to try to go to Edinburgh or do you want to go for questions?
Let's go to the video. Do you have a video for Edinburgh?
Yes.
Let's go to that. Those are
I'll
cool.
just skip right ahead. It's on a volcanic outcropping. There's buildings, main entry. We'll go right to the video. Oh. I have one more slide if you'll let me before you get to
go for it.
questions. I just wanted to end the presentation on a little personal note before we get to questions. Another reason why I really liked this trip, I went on the trip with my boyfriend. You probably saw him in the videos. We went to Isle of Skye, and this is Kerrang. We did a hike here and highly recommend. Beautiful hike. But he proposed on the hike, so I got engaged on the trip, which made it a pretty good trip in my opinion. That's
amazing. Wow. What a trip. That must that's definitely a highlight of your trip for sure.
Yeah, I think so.
That's awesome. That's well, he's definitely a smart man. I think it's hard to top a trip to Scotland and go through castles and propose at the height of your experience.
Yeah, he did a good job. So,
what's the
ready
name of
for
the animal?
questions.
Looks like a longhorn/cow.
Yeah,
maybe.
So this is another animal we saw a lot. We saw a lot of sheep, and hairy coos is what they call it. They're a type of cow, but they're everywhere. They're super adorable. You should go see them.
They're so shaggy. You want to hug them, but with those horns, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, we'll jump into some Q&A. So just about what season of time of the year were you out there in Scotland?
That's a good question. I went in May. I think it was beginning of May. So it was kind of cold. It wasn't, I don't think it gets too hot there, but I get cold easily. So I was wearing a jacket and it rains plenty of times, but yeah, it was in May this year.
Got you. That's fantastic. You know, you 8 days, 6 castles, and getting engaged. That was a very ambitious trip. Did you ever feel like you were missing out on something? Because I mean, these grounds are just expansive, and you know, I can imagine your steps being tracked on your phone. You know, you must walk so much. How
Yeah,
do you go about visiting all those things that you wanted to see?
that's a good question too. We ended up renting a car, so that made it a bit easier to get place to place. I probably would want more time in Isle of Skye just because it was such a crazy landscape. And it did rain a bunch. So some of the hikes that I wanted to do, we couldn't because the wind was too crazy and it was raining pretty hard, but still you kind of have to go there and brace the rain and be ready for it. But I feel like we did accomplish a lot. We hiked, we saw castles. There's a lot of Harry Potter history too, if anyone's a fan, especially in Edinburgh. And there's the Hogwarts train that you can see across the viaducts near Fort William. And we found, again, this is very Harry Potter specific, but we found Dumbledore's resting place. It's a little island. And it started raining, so it's already pretty dramatic. And then the Hogwarts train happened to go by at the same time, so that was pretty magical.
That sounds pretty magical. And I'm imagining something in my mind. It just sounds.
Yeah, I should have thrown that video in
Yeah,
there.
I was like, we need an image of that.
Yeah.
You know, it was very interesting for you kind of talk about the history, the glossary, the vocabulary of castles. And I feel that sometimes through society, we're trying to define the rules by which we build and edificate, you know, our structures. We think about the castles, the vocabulary that you explained to us was all about how do we protect our people? How do we protect ourselves?
Yeah.
So that in turn, then I imagine created a social culture, right? So that's very interesting. So from
Yeah.
that point of view, what elements that you saw from a social cultural point of view, I guess, that was a result of the way that things were being built and what you saw within the castles?
It's a good question. Yeah, I think you get the sense that everyone was pretty fearful back in those days. And you can see from the history, you were constantly under attack. You were constantly on edge of your seat, waiting to see if you get sacked or not, and if you get to stay in your castle. So you really get a feel for its constant war, constant defensive strategies. All the like we saw, the terms of the castle are related to defensive strategies, and that was a vital part. It wasn't all about royals and glamour as we might see in other castles, but you can definitely tell the Scots had a hard time, and they were persecuted a lot by the English, and it was kind of, you could sense there's still tension there.
Got you. I'm sure the having a great dancing hall wasn't a priority for them back in the day. You know, that's fantastic. I mean, looking at the castles, each of them in a different state of existence, but nonetheless existence. There's this kind of notion of permanence in what we do in architecture. And I imagine for you living here in the States and seeing how, you know, almost this kind of fast architecture of seeing that, you know, restaurants, even or, you know, facilities that tend to last a long time, you know, healthcare campuses, education facilities, municipal courts that have a span of 30 to 50 years. Nothing in comparison to these castles. So being in that environment, what emotions and experiences that you have in thinking about, wow, I am in this castle that one of them dates back to like 500 AD.
Yeah, it's definitely not something you see in Texas, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to see these. I I kind of wish we had more historic architecture here. Just you can't even grasp when you're there. This is from 500 AD. Like I don't even know anything around here that could even be close to that. Maybe some rock formations, but you really get a sense for architecture is happening even back then, and it still stands today. Even after all those wars, those poor buildings had to go through so many battles and different owners. And I guess thinking about like living in a house, you're like, well, there's 3 owners before this, and look how much it's like falling apart. But look at these castles; they've been through a lot, and you just really get a sense for the history and how old these things are, and how there's nothing else like it. So I'm glad Scotland took a handle, early on in the early 1900s. It seems that most of their castles got taken under their wing and restored, and I hope they keep restoring it. And even the castles that were more of ruins, you're still excited to see them and can visualize, even if they're not perfectly renovated with tapestries like we saw at Stirling Castle.
You bet. So being there, I imagine you met a few folks, and we do have a question, so I'll ask it in relation to that is, you're there in Scotland, you're obviously a tourist. I imagine they recognize you as a tourist. So what is the locals' attitude towards tourism? And what was, if any, your engagement with local folks there in Scotland?
Yeah, trying to think back. I don't think we had really any issues. People were very friendly. We had a few cases where they didn't understand us at all when we tried to speak to them, and we couldn't understand them. We kind of knew that going in, and but for the most part, people were asking where we were from, where we were going. We stayed in mostly Airbnbs too, so I think, at least for me, I like that aspect of living in a home of a local and hearing their story. The Isle of Skye Airbnb we stayed in, we met the couple, and they went and they also catch scallops, and they gave us some scallops and recommended some hikes. They recommended that Kerrang hike, which turned out to be a good hike. So I felt like people were very friendly, and I don't think you'll have a problem at all.
So tourism is generally accepted and is this part of their life now, I imagine.
I think so. I think at the castles too, they're excited. I think I had a little clip of one of the tour guides in his plaid pants. They're excited to show you around and teach you about their history. I don't think they're that defensive against England because they're part of England now, but I think they still have pretty patriotic sense of Scotland and their history and keeping it.
I personally be super excited to hear a Scottish accent, so I go there just for that.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting.
So I would just say a few things. We're coming here close to the end, but for all the folks that are there kind of watching us, just remember that for 2023, scholarships do close February 10th. There's opportunities for high school students, undergrads, grads, and young professionals. So take advantage, get the opportunity to do much like what Caitlin is doing. There's a few different fellowships that are available. So certainly reach out to myself, or more specifically, Katie Hitt, who is the managing director at the ADEX. She'll be glad to answer any questions, or go to our ADEX website to check out and learn more about it. So with that, I do have some final questions for you, Caitlin.
Okay.
So for those folks that are considering applying, what is your advice to them, and why should they apply to the scholarships or the fellowships?
Right. I think you should apply because there's not always a lot of applicants. So don't be intimidated. You will have a chance. And especially if you write a good proposal and it's thorough and you have some ideas of where you want to go, I think just do it and see what you get. You can go anywhere in the world, and you can have an incredible trip like this that turned out to be incredible architecturally and personally. And just, I think traveling is super important to learn more about yourself and the world and open your horizons. And I think it's also super important for architecture people and professionals to not be stuck in your own zone and learn more what's out there, even if it's historical.
Mm-hmm. You know, so much of learning on how to craft the right environment for ourselves, even here in Dallas, has to do with learning about culture. You know, codes, mandates, and requirements are certainly there to give us a guide. But there's something to be said about learned experiences from places that we visit. So I love that. For our donors who are so committed to making sure these programs happen, what are your message to our donors and also future folks that want to donate to these programs and why that's important?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I obviously super appreciate the opportunity and love any opportunity I can to travel and to have this this fellowship to apply to and study and research architecture and, you know, use those school muscles again. That it just became a really exciting project and I had a great time. And even watching this back, I mean, I have practiced this presentation and looked through it a few times, but even watching the videos again, I'm just excited again and want to go back. And I'm thinking about my next trip and what I can explore there. So I really appreciate it. And thank you to the donors. And for anyone thinking about donating, you could open the horizons to so many people and people who maybe haven't traveled and are scared to and just need a jump financially, and explore things educationally as well will always expand someone's horizon. So thank you.
Yeah, you bet, you bet. And so with that, your report, Caitlin, will be available on our ADEX website. So for all those folks that might have missed the opportunity to see your presentation live, we'll have a recording there, as well as the report of Caitlin, her experience, the things that she's seen, cool photographs, love the animals, castles are amazing.
Love animals. How did I throw those in there?
And you never know, you might get engaged as well. So, you
yeah,
know,
this could happen to you. Just
this
get
could be
this
your life
travel
story
fellowship.
if only you apply. No, very exciting. Thank you for sharing with us your experience on a personal and professional note. You know, again, just reach out to myself, Katie, if you have any questions. We're excited to see you continue to prosper your career, Caitlin. I imagine that this is a very foundational part of an amazing career path that is ahead of you. And I hope that for future fellows, that they too have a similar experience. And we look forward to our future opportunities to learn more about the world and where different fellows will go to their travels. Thank you all. And that will be it.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.